images, this artist, Allison, I think that I'm such I love color and I love sort of this veneer. I love light. I love the way light hits a body. I love the composition of both of these, but even more so, I love the vulnerability of these boys. And I tend to collect personally female children. Um, there was something about this image. I have two teenage girls, and I have a 11-year-old boy through a second husband, and I know nothing about boys. So this image really, I've raised girls. I'm great at that. I'm 100% girl. And then I was looking at this picture, and it made me really stop for a minute and think about sort of what the next. He's 11, like the next years of my life. But not only that, I love the way she has the gentleness, the expression, the light on the boys, the very painterly. I mean, the one to the left feels like a painting to me. To the right, like right, feels like a painting to me. His back, the way the light angles down and cuts into his back, I thought was quite elegant. And then when I first looked at the two paintings, I saw them as windows as opposed to paintings themselves. And so my eyes sort of adjust. But the composition of this work and these two images I found really compelling. And I found that the color was, there was just, the color spoke to the emotion that I was feeling. So this was just this really vulnerable picture two photographs that I thought were quite compelling. So this is my sort of like, is it a decisive moment or is it not? And is it something that, this photographer knew that the RV was going to be on fire, or is it something she just, was driving by and stopped? And, for this image, I think it just speaks a little bit to, where things are in the moment. It's been a really difficult couple of years, and I really liked this, like the composition of it and the way it was like directly in the middle, but it gave you that sort of foreground and then the background, because typically when people are photographing in these areas in the desert or cross country, this artist made the decision to put this on fire RV in front of the beautiful mountain, as opposed to, it's being blocked. And it just sort of comments to me that, that it's kind of a warning sign of be aware, things are changing. And I've seen a lot of things on fire before, but this was pretty compelling, and I just was curious, if the photographer, if it was something she was just driving by or she set it on fire. But I'm not sure what was going on here, but I liked it. It was compelling. So this artist, Kathleen, I actually ended up looking her up a little bit later, and she's a photographer, but she also does a lot of kind of installation contemporary work. And I think I was drawn to this because I wasn't really sure what I was seeing at first, and then I realized that, oh my gosh, that's a Lily Pulitzer, like, sort of jacket or maybe robe or cover up, and this dark sand that sort of like covered it. Because again, when I looked at it, I just didn't even see, I wasn't even sure what I was seeing. And then she's got this like black sand that she's just, kind of buried this very vibrant. And I think in general, like, as far as like a still life, and as far as like what she, this concept in her head of kind of bearing this, like, this idea of perfection in some way, in black. I mean, I love this image. I'm such a Little House on the Prairie fan, and this image it's about place, it's about people, it's inviting you into a environment that you would not be invited into. And that's what I think is such a beauty of photography is that the photographer as an artist can take you to a place that you would not be privy to. And I'm not sure, I see the places in Prattville, but the subject, and I love too the conversation between the subject and the photographer. Obviously, um, Jeremiah uh, had a really beautiful relationship with this woman, and she felt very comfortable with him, because she's smiling, she doesn't feel closed at all. She's really open to her home or space, to this particular photographer. And, this woman is a complete artist. I mean, there's no question. Every, image on her wall is such I mean, she literally could have she just opened herself wide up to who she is by all the details, and what is important to her, and, just the, the special care that she took in really sort of, you know, covering every piece of her wall with what is important to her, this other art, so she created an art piece. And I love that this photographer noted that she's an artist herself, and what she's passionate about she surrounds herself with, and that he went in and documented it, for all of us to see. And I really was, drawn to this image and all the details. This photograph, I wasn't initially, sure, was this, she's got a specific date on it. She has kind of marked it July 1st, 1981, crisis of experience. And there was something just in the obviously I was looking at a Polaroid, and we all know the nostalgia of Polaroids. And I just love this sort of documentation of the face is so distinct, like everything behind her is black, and this could easily be a painting. And it was even more exciting, actually, when I came to see the piece in person. I thought that what I would be seeing is a small Polaroid, but she had photographed the Polaroid and presented it sort of trompe l'oeil, where the photograph was kind of the Polaroid was kind of floating in white space. And I thought it was so large, and that was such an interesting decision. The expression is, there's an expression, but it's almost expressionless. Like, there doesn't seem like that she's happy or she's sad. It's just sort of a sense of maybe contentment or just resolve. And so I thought it was really beautifully done, and was very excited to see the piece in person. This work, I love street photography. I fell in love with Helen Levitt when I was at a show at the Museum of Modern Art in San Francisco in the early 90s. And I think that street photographers really force us to see, because we walk by people all day long, and we walk past people, and street photography for me is like the way of being present. And, these photographers that notice images, angles, people on the street force us all to stop and look around us. And so, there was a mystery. Like, he was able to capture this person who was smoking. I mean, even this one image, I had to blow up the hand not holding the phone to see that there was actually a cigarette, because I was wondering, was that smoke or just a shadow? And but this person's very passionate about street photography. It seems like he's the one that's got the camera on him at all times, and he's got a real way of capturing kind of angles and color in a way that I thought was compelling. And this image, in general, I felt like, who is this person? It's an anonymous person. You see his feet, you see his hands, you don't see his face. It really he really, this is, a beautiful choice of like just capturing the moment. I think that, he probably is poking his head out at some point, but he stepped back maybe to look at his phone. And I just thought it was a very strong photograph. I put these two together because I thought they kind of had a conversation. William Finn's, this work, like I sat with it for a really long time, even when I saw it in person. I loved the scale of it in the presentation. This was one that was a really hard to kind of, when I had to choose the color work, this was one that spoke to me because again, you've got this, the composition of it is lovely. The shadows of the trees, um, uh, the phone, the wires, whatever. I love this sort of conversation of like the house and then just this isolation in the middle of nowhere, leading to nowhere. And you have one image of gas, the gas in the phone pole and the lines where the lines like perfectly, there's just this kind of beautiful elegance of the lines, but there's like nothing, there's no gas station. I'm really obsessed with the old, telephones, that are now all gone on the streets and I'm always looking for them. So I love just this kind of like, well, where is everyone? And then the answer sort of, or, she's right here. She's like in this house, like the lines connecting, still connecting everyone. But I just thought these were both really compelling, and the composition for me was probably what made me select these two. I really, I wanted to look at landscape, so I pushed myself to, even though, as I mentioned, landscape was, and as I get older, which I am, I'm appreciating landscape. Maybe I'm just tired of people, but I'm appreciating landscape more, and really, I think it's just a frame of mind. And this image to me, I just really loved how the framing of the trees, like you've got the one tree dead in the center, but the framing, the choices that he made in the terms of cropping, like the trees and the branches coming out of the side, I thought that it was just this, this really this kind of perfect portrait of a tree. Uh, and it seems kind of lonely in the landscape, but the truth is there's it's got the family around him. But I just in general I just loved the composition. I mean, he could have moved a little bit left or right, and it wouldn't have had the same effect. So this was a great example of landscape for me. I really loved this. It's so painterly. It's so classic, and for color, this this dress and this person sort of walking down the stairs, and I found it interesting. It put me a little bit on edge where her hand isn't really touching the railing, and her foot is. She's almost like floating down the stairs. So, the whole image, the way that the artist decided to not show the top half of this person, but just sort of the bottom. And as she's walking down the stairs, there's a feeling of vulnerability, of fear, but also balance. And this photograph to me is all about balance, and the balance of color and the balance of life. So I really enjoyed this one. So I picked these two because I felt like the two together really spoke to each other. I didn't see the title, Juneteenth Parade, but what I felt was like disappointment. When I first saw these group of girls, I felt, oh no, looks like they were in a parade and it's raining, and this like sense of disappointment. And I loved the way they all were, probably supposed to be lined up to go on this parade, but each of them have a completely different expressions on how they feel. So this image was about expression to me, but it was also about uniformity, about coming together. So you've got the red and the white leotards, but they all have this similar plastic that's like, bringing them together. And some, seem very concerned. Like they're just, this image for me was about human emotion and about and about people around you, even when you're feeling, you know, scared, or and you have people around you, still have these like individual feelings. So and they just it was very similar to this like fabric that I typically wouldn't have chosen something because I'm still not sure what I'm looking at, and I want to like go back to this photographer Philip and say, why am I'm so drawn to these fabrics, these satins or silks? They're all weaved together, and when I had this image next to Mark's piece, I was like, oh, okay, this makes sense, and I'm not really even sure why, but I just love the idea of the abstract and maybe not knowing what this image was about, wave check, and then also not really knowing what the emotions were of these children, but then this kind of like uniformity of them all being like tied together as one. So I don't know why. I think I would have maybe hung those two together, and it's just more intuitive than anything else. And I think that's what art is all about, just an intuitive feeling, and never question that. So this is perspective. There's no question. This is perspective. And so I just thought, what a perfect, you know, and I'm, you know, assuming that artist doesn't have some sort of crazy threading, like holding the flag in that way, that he was, you know, photographing from underneath and the wind hit it, and just this beautiful sort of like, you know, image of the flag. And I couldn't forget, you know, it took me a minute to kind of crawl around the room in my head and figure out, where am I? And the same thing with the good book. You know, this piece large was really small in the show, which I thought was interesting. But the gravel has all these like speckles of color in it, and the speckles of color in the gravel and the concrete reflect the same colors that you're seeing in the book in the red wall. And I was really taken by, you know, the photograph forcing me to move around that. Plus I think it's a phone book, which, you know, I initially thought, well, it's got to be a Bible called the Good Book, but I don't think it is. I love this composition, the perspective, like, you know, the person is on the ground, like literally shooting this image. And I love the two together. And so this is back to my landscape thing, where this artist, I was so impressed when I saw his work in physical in the show. He made such a fine decision on his framing, and the size, and he or she. And I found that both the landscapes that I selected for the show were really, really well done. I mean, it forced me to stand and look and follow the other shapes that I was seeing and the other forms and figures that I was seeing in these landscapes. He also did a big rock and water. It was very compelling, and very well done. Like the presentation, the choice of size, the composition, and I mean, these are, you know, the types of landscapes I wouldn't see on a day-to-day basis, and you know, that really sort of pulled me in, and I loved these two pieces. I only have one showing here. So I did want to mention before I go to black and white that there was an artist that what was her name, that I ended up Tara Lee, that I ended up selecting. She had two pieces. One was a chair, and the other was, I think, a portrait of Jose, I think. And, you know, I didn't choose her for the lecture because, you know, I was always like, I couldn't tell from the paper, like, if it was grainy or if that was on purpose. And then when I saw the work in the show, I was really kind of taken aback. And, you know, the chair, and again, like I had mentioned, I'm more of a people person, but the shape of the chair and the way that she framed and made the decision to make an object of this chair, and the frame she chose, the grain of the wood was very thoughtful, and the same thing with the portrait of the man with the musical instrument and the green. And you know, what I thought was that the kind of pixelation that was going to bother me, like I really was absorbed in it. Like I loved kind of this whole sort of background curtain that she created with, and I'm not sure how she did it, but it was the framing even for the man, the portrait. Uh, was very selective, and like the frame wouldn't have worked on each, they were different, and I was taking them. I was really drawn to it, and last minute I was like, okay, I'm just going to choose one of them because one should be, they were both as strong as the other. So I ended up choosing one for one of the awards. This artist, I chose her, and I think it's a self portrait of her, and I found her, you know, of course, we're still kind of on the tail end of what's been happening, politically, socially, in the world, COVID. And there's such a sense of isolation. I have, four kids, two teenagers that I've watched really struggle over the last couple of years. And how to kind of maneuver in this world, social media. And, you know, I always remember, I heard one, I'm trying to remember which artist that was telling me this, but she does a lot of nudes, and they weren't so much provocative, but it was more about the skin. It was more about the skin being the house for the spirit, and the house that cases the soul and the person. And this image to me, I felt that she deserved sort of recognition in her bravery, whether or not she was going through, I'm not sure if she was ill or she just, what she took everything, all of her physical attributes, and just allowed you to kind of like see her in her skin. And I think all of us want to be seen in our skin, like who we are, and the shadow that that was reflected in front of her, sort of, it gave you sort of a window into sort of an abstraction of who she was, not this like realistic person. It's more of like the spirit and the soul. And I also liked her choice of like where she positioned herself, and like her spine, and then the spine of the corner, and then the lines in the wall. She also selected a sort of very simple gray angular frame, which I felt like was really conducive to this piece, because as it is black and white, it's more about gray, the color gray, than it is about black and white. And I think that, we think about like that gray zone of not being able to really feel anything. And she really just like, there was just this like, I was just compelled and thought that it was deserving of, it just felt to me the word brave and strong. And so I wanted to include it. So this is portraiture. And what I loved about this image, that, she had all this, it looks like maybe she's like I'm not sure where this person, Beverly, was photographing, but she kind of seems like she's in a circus, or a gypsy, or but she's very proud, and she's had these like these photos of herself that she would hang around her, and I just thought there was something very compelling about it. Like, um, it allowed you to see like how this person sort of saw themselves, and I think that the composition of it, I really liked this image. Her sitting there with her coffee and her her hair tied up, and but I think what was more interesting to me is how it's not photos of other people, it's photos of herself, but this looks like her home, so, or her place. So I found that really interesting, how photography was used. Maybe she had these photographs taken of her that she celebrated, and then she had someone taken up, was continuing to photograph her. But I don't think I've ever seen an image with someone sitting there with all these photographs of themselves around them. So it was a it said to me like wisdom and strength, and someone who is completely proud of who they are. And so I like this one. And again, perspective. I mean, it took me a minute to kind of figure out what I was looking at. And, it's a woman or a person trying to get out of this maze. And I think simply that's how, lost that we've all sort of felt. And I thought it was a nice commentary and a nice photograph in terms of perspective. Where is this place that doesn't quite, in architecture, it spoke in terms of like an architectural space, but not a real space. And the interesting thing is that she's in the middle of it. She's not quite out of it, and I don't know if it doesn't feel like to me she's needing to go one way or another. And I think it's about choices too, which way you go. This image to me, this was interesting. I did a This shows you how important portfolio reviews are. I did a portfolio review in Paris for Lens Culture, and like I have to say it was like 2010, 2012. I can't remember when it was. It was years ago. And this was not the kind of work she was doing then, but that name, Paula Ray Gibson, stuck with me. I remember she was like really attractive. She looked like a musician. She came in, she threw out all these images, and she was incredibly uh, just creative and interesting and vibrant and kind of like drew you in. And then I'm thinking, oh my God, I remember she lived in London. I was like, how, what? When I saw that her image made it here to Montgomery, and I didn't even know that until I started putting together the proposal. So I thought that was pretty wonderful, and I love the role play, and photography is documentation, but it's also just a medium to express your art, and I loved this kind of like odd perspective of these two women. And she obviously, she just kind of turned the photograph the other way. And these women look like they're upside down, but they're on the grass. And I just thought it was a really fun photograph. This image to me, the image, this is interesting because now I'm looking at it here, and in the show it's a lot darker, and I don't know if the artist intended that or not, but it's so much darker that you can't even see what you're seeing in the background. But I chose it because I loved the different tones and the whole notion of domesticity, of like the iron, the perfection of like, I look a lot at inward spaces of homes and people and how they live. And I love to see how, this space is very clean. It's very, it's not about, it's about simplicity. And, even to the point of like the hanging with the whatever she's ironed sort of hanging off of this one hanger. And I'm not really sure even what that is. I don't know if anyone else knows what it is. Like to the left on the cupboard, this weird, looks kind of like a frame maybe. But in the photograph, she cut off because I was afraid there was on the glass there was like a spot, and then I realized, oh no, it was part of the photograph, and it was that drawer handle, but it was halfway cut off. You could barely see it. So now, looking at, she cropped it for the photo. I think this would be a perfect photo if she allowed the framing. Like it needed space to breathe. But I did it just took me to a very simple place of calm. This is certainly the decisive moment, the shadows and the beauty of photography. There's a wonderful photograph by Willie Roney of a little girl walking over a bridge, and he was able to capture it right when the light hit her and she became the shadow. Not a shadow of her, but just her walking over the bridge. And this spoke to that. This image reminded me of that, and I loved the way that this artist just hit it at the exact moment of one of the children jumping, the other one full shadow. I felt a lot of empathy for this image. This boy is, holding up this like, magazine of, this Neiman Marcus ad, and kind of, I don't know if it was a school project and kind of cut the eyes out. And there were two of these, and it just, it made me think about people's identity and how people look at, you know, other people and, in race and, how there are, it made me like, it made me sad, but it also made me really aware of um, commercial how people are portrayed, how I think it's an important that today advertising or the way that we show everyone, we're not just showing a beautiful woman, we show black, white, Hispanic. I just found this image to kind of like it it just kind of took my breath away. And uh, and so I just liked the way that the photographer sort of put this mask. Um, I don't know if it was a school project but I thought it was really the masking and I had a friend of mine's child who was going through, and she's definitely like more, she's going to end up like wearing all black and being in, kind of more the punk rock scene. But this was when she was like 8, and she had a Vogue, and she was going through every image in the Vogue, and like every woman, she was like, putting these horrible faces, like, I was like, that is so indicative of like how she doesn't fit in anything in that magazine, and just such a commentary on how people need to, um, we need to be more representative. And so that sort of reminded me of like how she was just going through Vogue, and just like she had a red marker, a Sharpie, and it was pretty amazing. I thought this image was really beautiful. Just sort of said everything without having to say anything. Just the joy of these twins, and how completely the same they were, almost to the point of like, well, their clothes and their hair, their expression. And I loved how the artist chose to kind of put them not just in the foreground, but like be the foreground. And I thought it was a compelling image. This was one that I just, I'm a huge Walker Evans fan. I love historical photographs. I mean, you put me in an antique store, and I'm right there with all those old photographs, like just going through them. I can spend hours. And this image, and I met Jimmy last night, and one thing he said to me, he said, "Do you see that line where like all the people that are in this courtroom, like their heads?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh, yes, now I see the line." But I thought this was really spoke to how the viewer communicates with or doesn't communicate with their subjects. And this image, to me, I felt like you could split each of the subjects down, take a line, and they're all super compelling on their own, but even more compelling together. And this just, I'm a big sort of window saw lighter fan. I'm also like, I'm the one driving home at night after work, and it's dark, and I have quite a commute, and I'm always looking in people's windows, very curious to what people are doing. And this image to me really like speaks of like kind of being able to see someone, but not really being able to see someone. I'm a big Saul Leiter fan, and a lot of his images are through these like reflections. And I thought the composition, the softness of the image against the brick was compelling. I would love to say that I understand the technical and the labor that goes along in these processes that each of these photographers use, but I will say that I'm very drawn to the early processes, whether it's an embryotype or a dye transfer or a sepia toned or platinum palladium, cyanotype. I'm always drawn to that because I think it lends itself to painting, and I love painting. And so there's always this one level of like kind of this mystery and kind of illusion of something that sort of appears. And this image to me, I'm a big Joy Margaret Cameron fan. So obviously I looked at this and I was like, oh, I love this person. But at the same time, like, I love the delicacy of the subject, like behind. I can't, it could be male or female. I'm assuming it's female, but it kind of is androgynous, which I liked a lot. And I liked that you could see the paint strokes of what I think it may be a platinum. But I just thought that the the historical references and the position of the hand and the way she could have put the subject's face in front, but it's like behind, so it's kind of like almost like a garland, and sort of like hiding her. I loved everything about this image. This image really was surprising. I just thought, well, and when I saw it in person, the frame was fabulous. Like I would have chose like a yellow kind of orangey frame like that, but on this piece, it was like boom, like he got it. And I love this because the world is changing so quickly. This is a perfect title for how I feel on a daily basis, and I love this sort of like alien. I mean, I think it's a fair in Alabama somewhere, and I love the process that he used. Sort of made it feel like it was melting into the future or the past. And I thought it was the panorama view of it was really perfect. It was a fun photograph. It made me think of cinema, film, zombies, all kinds of things, and this is a this is definitely kind of futuristic, and I love the flags. I mean, the whole thing was very well thought out, and I know with these processes you don't actually know what it's going to turn out to be. So this is probably one of those surprising moments. I loved this piece. There's I think it just sort of allowed, I'm not sure exactly how Ginger did this, but I think that the overall uh, result was compelling. And when I went and saw the piece in person, this blue that she was able to get at the top of the photograph, and may have been a pinhole, or looks like it might have been sebachrome, I'm not sure, but I thought it was well done. I'm a I'm a big Sally Mann fan, so I love the kind of the embryotypes or the tintypes, and a landscape. And I thought this was really interesting because I couldn't quite figure out, and I'm pretty sure those are two figures in the landscape, but I was very intrigued by that because typically when you see landscapes that are um, either if this is embryotype or tintype, that you know, or landscape photographer in this vein, you don't always see the people. And I thought that was really interesting because I couldn't tell if there were people or rocks or what exactly I was seeing, but I imagined them as two lovely people in the water, or maybe two ghosts, but I thought the composition of it was really wonderful. And David's work, I was, you know, I love perspective and like the way that, someone can take an image and force you to go further and further and further into the image, and the clouds and everything was like it was a perfect shot. But he took it even further, and he looked like he lacquered it and shellacked it and made it sort of like a painting. So he made it like he used photography in creating this object, which I thought worked really well for this piece. I mean, simple, the little things in life. And Elizabeth Purdue, these little mushrooms, we represent an artist, Masao Yamamoto, and the way that she kind of had this piece floating. And I just thought that it was such a simple gesture, but it went a really long way for me in terms of like memory. Photography is all about memory. So this will be an image that if I see it again, I'll know. The lotus, it again, it played to this idea of like you don't have to be complex in making something really beautiful. And when I saw it in person too, I just, it was one that, it's the kind of image that you can live with for a really long time. I think people that collect, essentially kind of grow out of images. And this would be one I thought that, if they bought it, one of the first images they bought, they still would have it after 20 years. This was fascinating to me. I mean, I'm thinking of Weston, the Pepper, Edward Weston, and just this kind of anthropological study of an object. And I wasn't quite sure exactly, or I wasn't exactly sure of like the purpose of it, but it felt like to me that it might have been like, this. I just thought that like it was in a cross, and it's got all these different, like I want to sit down with Anthony, and is he here, and kind of figure out what the heck was going on here, like what was he doing, and I think that because I question and kind of this beautiful object, this kind of central object of a pepper that's been used in art historical references, like, what was this project about? I love the color of cyanotypes, the blue. And I just thought this, the composition of it was really delicate, and it almost looked like a drawing. And so I was very attracted to that. And I ended up selecting a cyanotype, and I think I was so compelled by the size of it. I think it was called like Ring Around the Rosies, Pocket Full of Posies, another one. And also the choice of maybe a Japanese paper, because the image felt wrinkled and almost felt like it was printed on a fabric, because it didn't have like a border, so I couldn't really tell. It was to the edge, but it was very beautifully done. And I think there were three cyanotypes maybe in the selection. And there's something about that blue. I mean, I don't know if it's just what it is, but it's something that I think I could envelop myself with, and um, and never tire of. So I've always been attracted to this sort of blue. This piece, Sweet Allison, this was I really I love ghost images. I love things that kind of speak beyond what you're looking at, and I I loved also that her choice of, I'm not sure what she was using in printing this, but it almost looked like there was some kind of like substrate in the printing process. It was kind of grain, almost it felt like it had a surface to it. Very similar, I think I had mentioned during the opening, to Sally Mann's Antietam work. There was no glass, and so the surface of it almost felt like it had, a grain or something in it. Uh, and typically I would say, oh, there was no glass on it, but I was very intrigued by it. And she chose a kind of a floral, kind of feminine frame with a little bit of hint of red, which on the edges, which I thought was interesting too. But this image was compelling. I was trying to show more images that were about light and life, and this sort of like, I was still drawn to it. And this was a hard one. I really had a hard decision in choosing with the black and white, my favorites, because this was a favorite of mine. This was one I would hang in my house. This is always so fun, because they really, again, photography is just a paintbrush. I mean, simply, it's part of, it's part of any artistic process. And, this felt like a negative, and then she had all these other images, and there looks like maybe a shadow in the back of another person, but then a double, portrait of the artist, which makes the other person, a double portrait of the subject, which makes another person. I always love to, I'll sit in the shower for hours and look at the marble and be like, what is that? What is it? And look at different images that kind of come and face me. And this was one that I could look at for a really long time and just see all kinds of different voices and forms. And I loved her choice of color in this piece. And I thought it was quite beautiful. This one was like, I think it's so interesting that, we all have these phones that we have for years and years, and I will go back to like my daughter was born with these like huge blue eyes, and then she like grew into them. I was like, where's that blue-eyed girl? She grew in, became an adult, and this is something where this image of this person, which obviously is taken from a painting, the colors, they digitally put the face and the eyes. It reminds me a bit of the Revenample, where they're taking parts and pieces and digitally creating a new image. And I thought she was really compelling. In real life, I kind of wanted to see her bigger. I don't know why. She was a little small. And actually, because I learned that there was a size constraint to the submissions. You couldn't, I think there was a limit. I loved this work. Liliana, this whole sort of like the communion dress. Typically you see, a beautiful, a beautiful, like if the child's going to communion, there's this like, elegant white dress, and there's so much expression and color and spirit in this piece. Also pain and exposure, and I was very drawn to this. I wanted to enjoyed seeing it in person. It's partially a photograph. I mean, I think that the hands and the belly, and if you look at the piece in person, it doesn't really translate. But the feet are photographic, and this person, I'm pretty sure, like when I looked really closely at the subject on the bottom, it's a person, and I think she has like um, obviously painted, and I think she's using photography. It doesn't appear to me, and she's also using painting. So she's in some way, I think, collaging the two together. An artist has all kinds of tools for their way of expressing themselves, whether it's partially photography, paint. I love photography that emulates painting. I love a photographer who actually paints on their photographs, and or a photographer who stitches or creates. I mean, I think that there's so many. Who am I to say what is a photograph? What is a piece of art? For me, it's like, it's like, oh, I'm a photography gallery. Well, actually, I'm a gallery that shows photographs. Is part of the medium of an artist. So it's I think that it's I'm always open to. I love straight photography, and I love manipulated, and I love painting, and so I think it's all like, I think that the beauty of photography is it can be used in so many different ways. I don't like to have to like put it in a box. I like to let it like have no boundaries and really expand. And that's kind of what this is. I mean, it's a perfect example. This person made this kind of, diorama, I'm thinking. And, the presentation was great, but the creativity that kind of went involved in like these little figures, these clay figures that she made, and this whole sort of setup to create an expression. And then she used photography to document, and she went even further to use like this kind of, oh, I'm sorry about that, this sort of interesting presentation where she has this like interesting framing sort of thing around it, and it looks like she'll shellacked the whole thing. So it became kind of an object with the use of photography. So this one, I came into the space and I walked in the gallery, and again, I didn't choose it because it was on the front wall. I chose it because I think that we all need, I didn't even look at the title. I chose it because I think it incorporates everything with all the amazing photographs and artwork that was in this exhibition. How am I supposed to choose, the best? It's like it's like an impossibility because there's so many elements. Like, there's black and white has stuff, color does, manipulate. It's just like an impossible task. It took me a very long time, but I kept coming back to this image because it didn't give me a time of like year it was. It didn't give me a real perspective. It just simply made me happy. And then I saw the title of it, and I was like, this is just really a conversation to like moving forward. And, you know, it's a birthday. Everyone loves birthdays. I love I have no idea what kind of cake that is, or even if it's a cake. Is that a scrambled egg? I'm not sure. Looks like a scrambled egg on top of a, you know, some sort of like, you know, cinnamon bun. I'm not really even sure. But I also just loved the idea of using the sparklers on the cake, and the hand. The hand is like this, like very strong but gentle hand, in the perspective of, I don't even know what, there was just something about it. And this is where it comes to what, why do you pick what you pick, you know? And it really just comes down to, it just it was an overall title to the entire show. It sort of tied it in a bow for me. It took everything that I had looked at for the last few months, everything I had chosen for the exhibition, and it said, everyone's invited. Everyone come see, come celebrate together. And I thought that was a beautiful message for the exhibition in general. This was interesting because I felt like I had to kind of, there wasn't a lot of abstraction in the show. And this, I think it's a photogram, really spoke to me, I think, too, because for whatever reason, I'm leaning towards blue um, in my spirit. But I loved the simplicity of this, um, and I thought it was really interesting. This piece, like, it made me smile because I love the beach, A. But B, it's not the beach. She has this beautiful way of kind of tricking you. And I was really trying to figure out what I was looking at. This kind of peeling of a paint or wall. When I read about it, I think it mentioned that she would go to like dumpsters and like photograph these walls on dumpsters. And I thought, this is amazing. Like, I love the whole concept of you know, seeing something very different than what it is, and allowing you, you know, forcing you to really think about what you're looking at. And this image was just, you know, again, I think I'm maybe a little bit in that boy zone. I think it's a boy. No, yeah, Max. And just the, you know, the sheer energy and spirit of this image just really spoke to me. The way she kind of has this subject behind this kind of, you know, abstraction that, you know, that takes him to another place. She did a really beautiful frame on this too that I thought worked really well. And I just loved this piece. It just gave me joy.